Hello, my name is Robert Gay, a Western Kentucky University graduate student, and this presentation will be an overview of Polaris's decision on where to conduct its future operations with regarding to manufacturing. But first, a quick overview of the company. It was founded in 1954 when its founders wanted a way to get their gear and supplies to their hunting camps up in northern Minnesota. Today, the company has grown to annual sales of $2 billion. 85% of that is in North America. They have 1,500 distributors in the U.S. They have 1,000 distributors in the rest of the world. Most of their manufacturing is done in the North American Midwest region. However, they have 450 global suppliers for their parts and equipment. So why does Polaris outsource most of its component but manufacture and final assembly in the United States? Well, previously said, Polaris does their final assembly in the United States, and I believe that's mainly so they can help put that made or assembled in the USA stamp on their finished product. But again, remember, they have 450 global suppliers. So why would they do that? There's a variety of factors. One would be the cost, and maybe another company could make part X for cheaper and better than you could in house. Research and development, they really focus on making the best part. It could spark competition to create a better part. If again, using part X, multiple companies may make part X, and therefore they're competing each other to make it cheaper and a higher quality to increase their sales. And an obvious example of that would be tires, right? I don't believe why would Polaris invest in manufacturing and developing their own tire when there are numerous tire companies out there where they can buy an off the shelf from Goodyear, for example, and put those tires on their side by sides and ATV vehicles. So what is vertical integration? So on the other hand, some companies like vertical integration. That's when they try to make as many parts or components possible in-house for their final product. Some examples of that would be I've heard IKEA does all that. They try to keep all theirs in with their inventory stored in their warehouses across the United States. SpaceX is another good one. But again, there's lots of factors such as control. Another factor would be is it sensitive or proprietary information? Think, for example, a U.S. Air Force fighter jet. Um, do we want Chinese-made electronic components in our U.S. Air Force fighter jets? Probably not. But again, there is no right or wrong answer whether you outsource or implement vertical integration. It's all about what the company needs. All companies are different, and the senior leadership and executives at those companies have to weigh in all the factors and determine what's best for their company. So, which manufacturing location offers Polaris the greatest cost savings? Polaris was considering three options. One, they could kind of reshoring and continue to invest in the U.S. manufacturing. Another option would have been kind of a nearshoring, which would mean, hey, let's shift some operations down to Mexico, or offshoring, should we send some operations over to China to see help reduce cost. In determining this, I used a highly complex algorithm Excel spreadsheet that I got from a great mentor of mine and a professor at Western Kentucky University. And then in this spreadsheet, I was able to plug in some numbers and help determine the quantitative advantage or disadvantage of each location. In there, and the quantitative factors we considered were capital investment, exchange rates, production cost, labor, transportation, shipping, tariffs. So again, using quantitative data only, and then with present data, and then forecasting out into the future a few years, my calculations determined that China would be the lowest cost, with Mexico being a close second in behind. Again, let's remember this is focused on the quantitative and in the numbers only. So next, let's talk about a sensitivity analysis or a what if analysis. Remember the previous slide we saw with some quantitative facts, and that was based on factual data from past and present, and then we forecast it out into the future. But now we need to say, what if? There's a lot of factors that change and fluctuate in day-to-day world economics. And those what ifs is what leadership needs to consider. For example, tariffs. Tariffs is a very hot topic right now. Remember, just recently, back in April 2025, President Trump announced a 145% tariff on Chinese goods. If that had went into effect, it could have more than doubled the China option from Polaris from $8 million to $17 million annually. That would have been a terrible situation for Polaris had they had already shifted to China. Another thing, trucking fluctuates too for a variety of factors that affect trucking and over-the-road transportation. For example, just within that little cell is fuel. Increased transportation cost, if fuel cost would increase transportation. Using the spreadsheet, I played around with the fuel cost and per mile, and if you raise that quite a bit, then China looks better, and the U.S. option looks not as good because of the cost of transportation. Labor rates is another factor to consider. Increased labor rates are always going to go up um, in the various countries. China's definitely becoming more developed, so their labor rates are going to go up. And with that too, kind of tied into labor rates is the exchange rate, right? Unfortunately, the American dollar isn't quite as the standard or strong as it was in the past, and therefore the other dominant exchange rates are starting to close the gap with the U.S. Bottom line, there's dozens of options and what if for sensitivity analysis that companies need to consider, and they need to play around with it and do the what if this, what if that to make the best decision for their company. So, what other qualitative factors should Polaris make when considering their manufacturing? One consideration is the talent gap. Which country offers the best, the cheapest, but most skilled labor workforce? That's a consideration. Another thing is the tariff uncertainty, not only the quantitative of the tariff number, but the qualitative of the current U.S. Political administration and their view on tariffs. So that's could fluctuate as well. And the overall economy. Remember, going back, 85% of Polaris' sales are in the United States, and therefore, what about the U.S. economy? They need to kind of forecast out there how is the U.S. economy looking, because Polaris' products, ATVs, quads, jet skis, snowmobiles, etc., those kind of fall into the luxury item category. So if the economy is doing well, then great, those items will do well as also. But if the U.S. economy were to take a major downturn, then luxury items such as quads and jet skis, those will not be as purchased as much, as people will then be turning the focus on major necessities goods. But lastly, the biggest thing that stands out in my mind that they must consider is the Made in the USA stamp. Again, going back, 85% of their sales is in North America, the United States, but within the North American bubble, it was the Southeast. So the Southeastern U.S. had a large share of Polaris's purchases. And again, the Southeast is very patriotic generally, and therefore they want to see that Made in the USA stamp on their products. So again, that would probably fall into the marketing team, but that's another qualitative factor. They need to know how important is that Made in the USA to the company branding and logo. Lots of factors to consider. But again, no company is the same. Each company leadership must evaluate what's best for their company with the data they have at hand. This concludes my presentation about Polaris and their decision to shift manufacturing overseas or reinvest in the United States. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to your feedback.